Let's see that. Carissa, I'll never forget it. It was a few years ago when I forget the name of your predecessor. Who? I'm sorry. I think so. Yeah, he held a news conference, and his shirt and tie was an exact match to that backdrop. Oh, you were waiting for me. Okay, I'm ready when you guys are.
Everyone else ready? So I just did a quick overview. I want to make sure that you saw there's some QR codes placed around the room, and then there's one on the front door when you come in. Just scan that. That has all kinds of goodies for you. You have your arrest warrant, search warrants, crime scene photos, everything's there for you. So our group's going to come in. They will speak. We'll have Chief Purdue, Detective Whitlock, and Captain Garner. Then we'll have some of our partners that assist in the investigation. Anything you need from me, let me know. Okay, everyone's good? We go. Thank you. Okay.
Well, good morning. My name is Jimmy Purdue. I'm the chief here at North Richland Hills, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to be here with us today. The purpose of being here today is we're going to talk about a conclusion of an investigation that has been going on a long time. The original investigation started many, many years ago, and we're going to get to walk you through some of those, all that work that went on. But we want to take a moment to thank the people who had a role in all this. Because this was not done by any single individual, but through a collective partnership with a lot of individuals and a lot of departments. There'll be a few individuals that will get up and speak specifically, but we want to make sure that we recognize the agencies and the individuals that helped us get to the conclusion of this case. First of all, FBI Special Agent in charge, Jeff McGuire, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation Lieutenant Josh Dean, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation Special Agent David Gatlin, North Richland Hills Police Captain Mickey Shelley, North Richland Hills Police Sergeant Billy Schneider, North Richland Hills Detective Eric Whitlock, and North Richland Hills Captain Jeff Garner and his wife Babbitt and son Levi are joining me up here on the stage here this morning. So let me just briefly set the stage for you about what we're going to be talking about, and there'll be a lot of more specifics coming up in the next few minutes. So back in 2003, then Officer Jeff Garner was conducting a traffic stop in the 7900 block of Bercy Road when he attempted to stop a red Jeep Wrangler. Unbeknownst to him, that vehicle had just been involved in an armed robbery in Watauga. Shortly after the traffic stop initiated, the driver fired at Jeff Garner, striking him once in the ankle. As you can imagine, there was a very thorough investigation that involved a lot of people back in 2003, but unfortunately the case went cold very quickly and no further leads happened. Not a lot happened with the case for many, many years going forward until it resurrected the case by having somebody assigned to it to look at it from what we commonly refer to as a cold case review. It landed in the hands of Detective Eric Whitlock in 2015, and frankly, he has not slowed down in his attempts to try to solve this case. I say the case landed in his lap, it's more like he took it into his lap because he was determined in order to make sure that he found a conclusion of this case. Detective Whitlock he's not a cold case investigator. We don't have one of those. We simply assign cases to individuals as things happen, and this would be one of those additional duties as assigned that Detective Whitlock took on. I can tell you that he has been tireless and passionate and tenacious in his investigation of this crime. We're very, very proud of him. He will be the first to recognize and will probably say today that he did not do it alone, and I appreciate that and agree with him. But it always takes somebody to be the champion for a particular case. And in this case's champion was Detective Eric Whitlock. And I just wanted, in front of everybody, to let him know how proud I am of the work that he did, how well he represented our agency, and frankly, our profession of law enforcement. This is what policing is about, that we always pursue the criminals no matter where the leads take us, and as long as it takes us to get it done. There's a few people specifically that I want to thank to make sure for the work that they did before Eric comes up and speaks. First of all, to our North Richland Hills Police Department Special Investigation Unit. These are our undercover people that are obviously not here today for obvious reasons. Their role in making sure that all the work got done behind the scenes was very valuable in the conclusion of this case. Our Sergeant Billy Schneider, who's with us here on the stage today, and the work that he did in both coordinating with Detective Whitlock as well as doing the work up in Oklahoma. Our OSBI and FBI partners that we could not have reached the conclusion we did without their work. And lastly, our crime scene investigator, Jenny Espy, who did a lot of really great work in recovering evidence here in the last, that you'll see here in front of you, and that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. So with that, I want to turn it over to Detective Eric Whitlock, and let him walk you through some of the details of the case. Eric?
Thanks, Chief. Good morning. Thank you for all being here. My name is Eric Whitlock. I'm a detective at the North Richland Hills Police Department. Apologize, a little bit under the weather, so hopefully y'all can understand me. I think the case finally caught up to me after these last couple weeks. So this story begins on the fateful day of March 3rd of 2003. That day, the lives of Mark Allen Long and Jeff Garner fatally intersected. On March 3rd, 2003, in Watauga, Texas, at Bank 1, at approximately 1:18 p.m., Mark Long entered said bank and approached the teller. He provided the teller with a demand note indicating he was armed and asking for money. Subsequently, after he received the money, he left that bank at approximately 1:21 p.m. At approximately 1:33 p.m., then Officer Jeff Garner was conducting a traffic detail in the north part of the city. Unbeknownst to Jeff, the bank robbery had not been disseminated because of radio difficulties back in the day as far as communication between different agencies. He had no idea that this individual just robbed the bank. He had no idea the description of the red Jeep Wrangler, anything of that nature. He simply inquired into the vehicle for traditional traffic stop. Ultimately, a pursuit ensued, and during that pursuit, the suspect, Mark Long, conducted a U-turn and then drove straight at Officer Garner, firing 5 rounds with a revolver out the driver's side window. One of those rounds struck Officer Garner in the right ankle, and Officer Garner returned fire, approximately 8 rounds, and towards the driver of the vehicle. As Chief said, investigation was conducted. All leads were followed up at the time. Unfortunately, it just went cold. Case went cold. Whenever I began looking into the case in around 2013 unofficially, and then officially assigned it as lead investigator in 2015, my strategy was with any cold case, you kind of start at the beginning. You look at all the details, you look at all the facts, and you try to see, well, where are the leads at? I observed that there were 6 other bank robberies that I believe have been perpetrated by the same individual. These 6 bank robberies stemmed from 3 different states: Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. First one was in Oklahoma in 1998. The second one was in Oklahoma in 1999, both Oklahoma City. The third was in Wichita, Kansas in 1999. Fourth was in Fort Worth, Texas in 2001. Fifth was in Arlington, Texas, 2002. Sixth was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, just a few weeks before our actual bank robbery. The final one in Watauga, Texas in 2003. The connection between these cases, it was pretty apparent. Suspect, same physical descriptions. Ultimately, there were actually 3 of them that ended up being linked by DNA that was discovered from evidence discarded at the crime scene that the suspect had disguised himself with. The MOs in certain ones were similar to MOs in other ones, so it was kind of like this little spider web connection. 3 of them, the Arlington, Tulsa, and Watauga bank robberies, the suspect donned a cowboy hat, fake facial hair, earpiece or communication device in his left ear. So again, kind of all connected. So the strategy became solve any one of those bank robberies, and I potentially have a suspect for our bank robbery. So that's the approach I took with the investigation. I contacted FBI Oklahoma City office in 2015, 2016, and I obtained an item. It was a brown knit glove from their 99 bank robbery. A glove had been worn by the suspect. He'd actually cut himself, we believe, on the glass that he broke into the bank to where he eventually entered the bank. From that blood in the glove, we were able to obtain a SNPs profile. Basically, it's a genealogical profile. And with that profile, we entered that into a public law enforcement opt-in database. So in other words, individuals have to actually, they give their permission for law enforcement to search against their profile. And so that was in 2019. We actually hired a company, Identifiers International, and that company ultimately owned by Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick. She assigned one of her advanced forensic genealogists, Linda Doyle, to conduct the forensic genealogy. And during that time, there were some matches to the suspect profile. However, they were distant relatives, so distant that it was going to be difficult to build out the family tree. Well, on December 7th of 2021, we were notified by Ms. Doyle that an individual had uploaded their profile into this database, and that it was more than twice the match than the previous individuals who had been in that database as far as relation. And so, of course, I've been disappointed many times before, so try not to get my hopes up. Well, on December 14th of 21, we were notified that this individual, Mark Allen Long, was believed to be the suspect associated with the DNA profiles found in 3 of the bank robberies, Oklahoma City's and Arlington. And so the investigation from a traditional police standpoint began at that point. Of course, we partnered with OSBI, and I apologize, I was supposed to at the very beginning of this give accolades to everybody. I'll tie that up at the end. But OSBI analyst Taryn Wade, she helped me do thorough research on Mark. We discovered that he owned a red Jeep Wrangler, 92, in the Watauga bank robbery. That was consistent with the suspect vehicle description, red Jeep Wrangler. We also discovered he owned a white Land Rover Range Rover 4.0 SE, 1995 model. In the Tulsa bank robbery, that was 3 weeks before our bank robbery, approximately 3 weeks before, we actually have images of that suspect vehicle, which is the same make, model, year, and trim level that Mark Long owned. So we looked into his physicals, height, weight. Everybody in the bank robberies that gave descriptions of the suspect always described him as having like a protruding belly, short, heavy set, all that was consistent. Another notable feature that was described in several of them, including the Watauga Bank robbery, was significant or notable ruddy complexion, pockmark scarring, something like from acne or something similar. And so he had that. Also been described as thinning or balding hair. He'd taken his cowboy hat off in our particular bank robbery, and they were able to notice that he was in that balding or thinning stage. So he did in fact have that. So we're very excited at that point. Definitely a viable candidate, a viable suspect. I'd always believed that the suspect hailed from Oklahoma because the Jeep that Officer Garner had tried to pull over, or did pull over, it had no inspection or registration sticker. And the only states surrounding, surrounding Texas that didn't require some type of sticker to be affixed to the front windshield was Oklahoma. And typically you see an individual, they steal a vehicle to commit a robbery, they just change the plate. They don't really go to the extent to change the inspection or registration sticker. So we verified he's a lifelong Oklahoma resident, born in Oklahoma City. And of course also, Oklahoma City was the first bank robbery that we knew of, so it makes sense, start local we were familiar with. So things were looking good at that point. We verified that he was not in CODIS, which is the national DNA database for offenders. So that's obviously another good thing. Otherwise, we should have, that would be bad because he wasn't matching the profile then from the crime scenes. We learned he was actually, before the first bank robbery, January, February of '98, he actually had been interviewed by the FBI. That particular case occurred where Mark received a check for approximately $30,000 erroneously. He forged an endorsement on the check, cashed the check, and proceeded to spend about $26,000 of it. FBI was notified. They conducted an investigation, ultimately concluded that yes, he did in fact commit that offense. Mark Long was arrested in approximately February of 2000 for that offense. Unfortunately for us, it was dropped from a felony to a misdemeanor. They didn't get his DNA, all that stuff. It actually didn't even get added to his criminal record, and we still don't exactly know what happened there. So he got lucky on that one. We continued to look into Mark's history, and we learned some interesting things. One of the things that we learned was that his great-grandfather, Sam Long, was actually sheriff of Love County. He was killed by a bank robber in 1928. So just all these unusual things. Everything, like I said, though, was painting a picture that this is possibly our guy. So of course, the next logical step was to get his DNA to compare to the unknown profiles from the crime scene. So myself and undercovers, for obvious reasons that can't be mentioned, their names can't be mentioned, we went up to Oklahoma in February of 2022, and we conducted surveillance on Mark for several days. On February 17th of 2022, we were able to secure from a restaurant where Mark had dined at a fork, a spoon, and a straw. And we subsequently submitted those items to a lab. We received notification later on from the lab that it was in fact a DNA match to the profiles from the 3 crime scenes. So at this point, extremely confident we've got our individual. Of course, we still have to conduct further investigation because our bank robbery didn't have DNA. So at this point, it was decided that myself and FBI agent Matt Jamerson could not be with us here today, even though I tried to get him here. We would interview Mark on April 1st of 2022. FBI had 2 active Oklahoma cases, the 2 first Oklahoma City cases I mentioned in '98, '99. They'd actually done DNA indictments on John Doe back in the day. So they had 2 viable bank robberies. So kudos to them for forward thinking back then when it was still pretty new, DNA-wise. So on April 1st, 2022, myself and Agent Jameson, we went to Mark's work, and we waited till he left, and we approached him in the parking lot, asked him if he'd be willing to talk to us in a voluntary capacity. He agreed, and so we conducted an interview. Mark acknowledged owning the '92 red Jeep Wrangler. He acknowledged owning the white '95 Range Rover. When we were talking to him, one of the things that we wanted to establish was what firearms he owned. We got into the conversation with him about, is he a hunter, stuff like that. Eventually he listed the firearms he owned, except he left out one important piece, which was this 357 Llama Comanche Model 3. Obviously that would become very important later on. Of course, we didn't know at the time. He just simply left it out. He said, I don't own any revolver of that particular caliber. And of course, we were interested in that particular caliber because 2 bullets that were recovered from the shooting scene were 38 class caliber bullets. And of course, 357 can fire 38 special, etc. The comment he made to me that I'll probably never ever forget in that context of hunting and firearm ownership is he made the comment, the only thing I shoot is with my camera, and that kind of stood out to me at the time. We eventually progressed from kind of background questions to getting into the nitty gritty of the bank robberies. We wanted to start with the bank robberies. He didn't know I was from North Richland Hills. We wanted to leave that out of there because obviously you start off with that and he's likely to shut down real fast. So we started out with just the bank robberies, mostly Agent Jamerson talking about his bank robberies. We brought up the Arlington bank robbery, asked him to explain how his DNA was found on an item that was located at that particular bank robbery. He came up with a story I find, I believe he already concocted this in his head, years ago, but that he must have sold the shirt in a thrift store in Oklahoma, and somebody bought it from that thrift store and then wore it to the bank robbery in Texas. So, okay, fine. Have you ever owned an Orkin shirt? Because this particular shirt was a white long sleeve Orkin shirt that was used in the Arlington bank robbery that had his DNA on it. Have you ever owned an Orkin shirt, ever worked for Orkin, anything of that nature? No. Okay, well then, how's your DNA on a shirt that you've never owned that you sold at a thrift store? So at this point, I think he realized that he was kind of, fumbling. So then Agent Jamerson asked him about how his DNA was also found in 2 other bank robberies on items that would not be sold at thrift stores. One was a surgical mask and pantyhose from the '98 bank robbery, and the other was we don't have it with us, but the brown glove from the '99 bank robbery. It was at that point he said that he believed he needed a lawyer. And so Agent Jamerson ended his interview. We exited the van in which we were talking. However, since it's a voluntary interview, there's Miranda, that sort of thing doesn't apply in that particular situation. And so Mark was obviously free to leave at any time. I asked him if I told him, I didn't tell him where I was from, but I told him I was investigating some Texas offenses, and I'd like to ask him some questions if he was willing to listen still. And he said he was. So we continued talking. Shout out to Brian Harris, who helped me with interview strategy. Muddled through it as best I could. I was a little bit rusty, but so I was, engaging with Mark. We were talking. He continued to deny bank robberies. Ultimately, got to the point where he decided he just didn't want to talk anymore. So the last thing I said to him, the last time I ever talked to him, was I told him, I gave him my card with North Richland Hills logo on it. He looked at it, and I'm confident that he knew what I was there for from the beginning, but at that point there was no doubt. And he looked at me, and then I just told him, I said, Mark, remember your great-grandfather, Sam Long. Remember your great-grandfather. And he just gave me a double nod while looking at me, and that was the last conversation I had with Mr. Mark Long. So, unbeknownst to Mark, during this interview, part of our strategy was we wanted to ensure that he didn't really know what all we had against him. We'd already procured search warrants for his vehicle, his house, and a buckle swab search warrant. FBI conducted that. OSBI, Special Agent David Gatlin, over here. He was instrumental in helping me with this case. I mean, there's so many people helping me, so much teamwork, but he took this case, as if it was his own, as if he had been working on it for 9 years, like I had. And I provided him with the information of my investigation. He had completed 3 search warrants. One was for Mark Long's residence, one was for Mark Long's vehicle, and then one was for the Jeep Wrangler that Mark Long had previously owned that we tracked down. And so the search warrant was actually being executed while we were interviewing Mark Long. Of course, we didn't want him, knowing what we found and knowing, that he would have known that was there, obviously that would have probably shut him down a lot faster. So that was the strategy. It went flawlessly. It couldn't have gone any better, aside from the confession, of course. And so they're conducting the interview, or the search warrant at the house. We're conducting the search warrant, or OSPI was conducting the search warrant on his vehicle. We didn't find anything of note from his vehicle. There was some stuff that indicated maybe he had impersonated himself as a fire marshal, but nothing related to our actual offenses. And so I headed over to his house. Mark, obviously, he was free to go at any time. He went to his house while the search warrant was going on. He told his family that he had no idea what was going on, that simply, we must be there for somebody that used to live at that house. That was the story that he gave them at the time for why FBI, OSPI, and North Ditch Police Department were conducting a search warrant on his residence. A lot of items were taken. We haven't had time to go through them. A lot of digital items, electronic evidence. Not sure what's on those, but of course the item of note that we find out later on is the revolver. We found that in his bedroom, under his bed, in a case. It was loaded with 38 special rounds in the cylinder, same caliber class used to shoot Officer Garner. And so that weapon being found in context of him leaving that out in the interview as a weapon he owned got a lot of us very excited that, against all odds, 19 years later, did he actually keep the weapon that he used, in multiple bank robberies and to shoot Officer Garner. So a little bit tempered. I was kind of, been let down before, so we'll see about that. So the next day, that was on April 1st. The next day, April 2nd, we conducted the search warrant on the Jeep. We tracked down the Jeep. On the paper trail, it looked like Mark had sold it to a lady that lives in Oklahoma. When we actually researched further, once we located her, we learned that actually it had a sale between that just wasn't on record. But so we're talking to her, processing the Jeep, and I remember Sergeant Schneider, who helped me quite a bit through all of this, and he comes over to me and he tells me, I think there's an indication of some bullet damage in the tailgate. I'm like, don't mess with me, that's crazy. But he's no, I'm being serious, and he was serious and he was right. What we discovered was that in the lower left part of the tailgate was a body filler repair that had obviously been used to cover up a hole that was consistent with what one would find if a projectile entered the back of a tailgate from a firearm. And so, shout out to the Newalla Fire Department. Yes, the police had to ask the fire department for help. We couldn't get the tailgate. We wanted to take the tailgate. We couldn't get it off the hinges. We got one off, but we couldn't get the other one off. And so we had to take the Jeep to Sergeant Schneider actually drove the Jeep to Newalla Fire Department, and they utilized their tools to get the tailgate off for us. Excuse me. So shout out to them. And so once we got the tailgate off, at that point, we conducted a few additional interviews, things like that, and then we headed back to Texas. So immediately when I got back to Texas, took the firearm to the Tarrant County ME ballistics unit, and shout out to Mateo. He did a real solid for us in getting that testing done quickly. We also processed the tailgate, took it apart, actually peeled, the layers off, which I believe you see right there. And, again, it's a bullet hole. I mean, anybody that looks at that can say that is, it's not a rock that, jumped up and hit the tailgate and penetrated through 2 layers. It's a bullet hole. And the way it expanded on the back, the rounds that were fired from Officer Garner were hollow points, so obviously that's why it didn't go through and through. And so at this point, we're just waiting on the firearm. And so on, sometime that week, we get word that everybody's been waiting for, that the ballistics from the 2 projectiles found at the shooting scene were in fact a match to this revolver. They were fired from this very revolver owned by Mark Long, found in Mark Long's bedroom. And so it was at that point I was confident with moving forward with attempting to obtain an arrest warrant for attempted capital murder of peace officer, Officer Jeff Garner. And so on April 8th, 2022, I went to Tarrant County District Attorney's Office and presented 4 arrest warrants for review to a district judge. Attempted capital murder peace officer, aggravated robbery for the Fort Worth offense, robbery for the Watauga offense, and robbery for the Arlington offense. Of course, I've already been in discussion with those agencies, and they agreed to allow me to take over their cases. So on April 10th of 2022, we went up to Oklahoma, myself and the undercovers and Sergeant Schneider, and our plan was to effect the arrest of Mark Long on said warrants that were signed by the district judge. We were supposed to arrest him the morning of April 11th at his place of work when he arrived. However, Mark Long would never arrive to his work. We conducted further investigation and subsequently learned that on April 10th, 2022, at around 11:20 a.m. approximately, Mark Long had jumped off of a cell tower to his death. And he took with him, things that only he will know, the whys, essentially. Why did he do all of this? So after 19 years, the case of who shot Jeff Garner was finally closed at this point. It had been a long time coming. While many questions will remain unanswered, what is known is that Mark Long robbed 7 banks. He displayed a firearm in 4 of those 7, which caused numerous bank employees to experience immense fear. Some of them had to seek treatment, things of that nature. I believe it still bothers some of them to this day. In addition to that, the shooting of then Officer Jeff Garner, it caused he and his family immeasurable grief and confusion for the last 19 years. 19 years went by with he and his family wondering, like, why, who? While Mark Long appeared to have done things outside of this 5-year time frame that were beneficial to society, which makes it all the more confusing to us. He obviously lived a double life. And his 5 years of horrific actions will inevitably tarnish his legacy forever. I just want to say that I've interviewed a lot of his family and friends. I know that media and journalists have a job to do, and part of that is getting the story. But I ask that you give them time and space to process all of this. I'm confident when I say that the only person that knew about these offenses, other than now everybody will know, the only person that knew about these offenses at the time was Mark Long. I don't believe he told any of his friends, any of his family, not his closest, not his best friend, not his brothers, not his sister. And so his negative actions should not have negative implications towards them. They had nothing to do with this. So just please, if you can, give them space and let them go through their grieving process. And so, again, backtracking, I was supposed to do at the beginning. I'm thanking everybody. Agent Matt Jamerson, FBI, Wilson McGarry, AUSA, helped me tremendously on, through this case, my case, as if it was his own, even though we had, 2 federal cases, he still helped me with my stuff. David Gatlin, Special Agent, OSBI, Captain Beth Green, OSBI, she basically got the ball rolling as far as OSBI assisting us. Josh Dean, he did all the ops plan stuff. Lieutenant Josh Dean, OSBI. Taryn Wade, OSBI analyst. Tarrant County District Attorney William Vassar, Assistant District Attorney. He, always answered all my phone calls, my questions, preparing for potential prosecution down the road. All the undercovers away from their family for numerous days. And, always willing to go to Oklahoma whenever I needed it, no questions asked. Had some plans they already had established. Sergeant Billy Schneider, again, kind of helped me, through after, when we learned that, Mark was, dead and I wouldn't be able to close the case the way that I wanted to. And Linda Doyle, of course, with identifinders. All that being said, I'm gonna turn it over to the man of the hour, Captain Jeff Garner.
Good morning. It is Good Friday. Those who know me best know that typically I would like to speak freely and candidly, but it has been an overwhelming week. And I don't mind confessing that I need to rely on a written statement to ensure that I can get through this and do it with justice, do the people involved the honor that it deserves. So as has already been reported, Mark Long shot me while fleeing from the commission of a bank robbery on March 3rd, 2003. 3/3 of 03, interestingly enough. What is most important for me to communicate today is that March 3rd was only the prologue to the real story. That story began in 2007. At that time, I was a young sergeant, and I'll be honest, I was doing my best to put this incident behind me. However, I had a young officer on my shift, and he persisted in bringing it up every chance that he had. I would get over this, and he would rile me back up. But that new officer was Detective Eric Whitlock. Eric was passionate about the lack of justice that had taken place in this case. If I was frustrated or angry in this time, I'm quite sure Eric was even more so. Truth be told, it wasn't because it was me, and it really had little to do with the fact that I was a fellow police officer. It had to do with Eric's fundamental belief in justice and his commitment to those principles. Eric would constantly tell me how he intended to make his way to criminal investigations and eventually investigate my case. And that's just what he did. There are many people who helped make today possible, but always, Eric has been the driving force. He never gave up. That is how he solved this case, and that is the same way he made an arrest in the 2004 cold case murder of Gabrielle Aguilar. Every new technique, all the emerging technology, Eric researched through his own initiative and brought this into our case. And it must also be said, as Chief Purdue mentioned, that he accomplished all of this while managing his primary caseload as a fraud detective. So I think it's important to say that this is not my story. This is Detective Whitlock's story. Eric has given me the incredible gift of closure by way of a miraculous accomplishment. He's given that same gift to my wife, whom I had only been married to for 5 months, and she received a phone call telling her that I had been shot. And Eric provided this gift to my son, who had to inherit this story by virtue of his dad's profession. You've heard Detective Whitlock mention the other people involved in the story, and I'm grateful to them beyond words. Colleen Fitzpatrick and Linda Doyle of Identifinders. For her part, Linda spent 3 years of her life working on this case. She gave me this gift. Captain Shelley, Sergeant Schneider, and the members of our Criminal Investigations Division, to include each member of our Special Investigations Unit. Each of these people recognized the importance of this gift, and they sacrificed to make this day possible. The honor of their work and their friendship is immeasurable. The members of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations and our colleagues in the Federal Bureau of Investigations, somehow they all saw something in this story, and they helped make this day possible. Carissa, our media coordinator, for years Carissa has worked tirelessly to honor this story. This week in particular, her work has placed her in a front row seat as I have processed 19 years of emotions that I never even realized I was holding on to. I'm grateful for the role she has played throughout this, and especially for her compassion. I'm also happy to thank our partners in the media. You saw the value in this story. You kept it alive, and you have always done honor by what happened to me on that day. I thank you for that. Lastly, I thank the members of our community who lifted me up in the aftermath of this event, and it helped confirm my chosen profession. To this day, I have boxes of letters, cards, and pictures that I will always hold on to and I will always cherish. As I like to say, while one of Mark's bullets hit me, the other 4 missed. And I have done my best to honor my survival day through serving the members of this department and our community to my fullest ability. There's one more person to thank, a person who will always be unknown, but will hopefully hear this message. You opted in, with no imaginable idea of the role that decision would come to play. You shined a light into darkness and brought justice and healing. You gave us all a gift that would never have been possible. And along with Detective Whitlock, you gave me the gift of a life beyond this incident, and I cannot wait to see how it will be. I have received every answer I ever wanted. We located the gun, and we located the Jeep. My bullets left their mark, and they placed that Jeep at the scene of the shooting. And while it's inconsequential to any prosecution that won't take place now, 19 years, 1 month, and 9 days later, I identified Mark Long in a photo lineup. I never forgot his face, and now we know his name. On that note, I think it's important to say that Mark Long, the Mark Long who wrote his name on this chapter of my life, he was not the man that his family knew, particularly his 3 siblings who survived him. Over the past few months, and since Mr. Long was positively identified, I have come to understand that I have been carrying the weight of this event for 19 years, and I am eternally grateful for the opportunity to finally set it aside. While I am grateful, I recognize the Long family is grieving. The Mark who shot me was not the Mark that they knew. In many ways, these recent events have made them victims of Mark's actions, the same as it did the employees of 7 different banks. I am truly sorry for their loss, the loss of the brother, and I pray they find their own path to healing. And I'm ready to begin my own. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. I appreciate it. You can tell, ladies and gentlemen, that this is more than just a simple investigation. This has affected our family here at North Kitchen Hills. It's something that we've cared for. I've been here 16 years. Something I heard about very quickly after getting here, and something that has been carried forward. And I'm so grateful to all the people that are involved that we were able to reach a conclusion, not only for Jeff and his family, but also for the entire North Kitchen Hills Police Department family. We're grateful to all our partners for all the help that they gave us. But lastly, I'll end where I started in thanking Eric for the great work that he did in making sure that this case was thought all the way through to the very end. We're extremely grateful. Be glad now to be able to answer any questions you might have. I'll be trying to help guide those conversation and direct them to the right people if you have any questions now.
Chief, I've just been wondering, the Jeep where that tailgate came from, at the time, was it actually owned by someone and on the road, or was it sitting in a junkyard?
So the Jeep was actually owned by an individual at the time. We got lucky on that one. Obviously, very high mileage vehicle, commonly scrapped for parts, but it was owned by an individual. It was not being actively used and been registered for a few years, but it was in running condition.
Captain Carlson, when you were shown a photo of this person, I guess, did it stir up any memories for you immediately at all? And then just over the years, did you ever lose hope that you ever find this person?
The answer to the first question, yes, it stirred up a lot of memories. That was something that was very important for me to do. I had always wanted to do a lineup. Obviously, lineups are somewhat risky. They're not always reliable. There's a concern that this far after that I would not be able to recognize him. We had questions of whether or not we would actually even conduct a photo lineup, but it was something that had always been very important to me. It's the way things turned out. There was no risk left. I met with investigators this past Tuesday night. Really, for no other reason than my personal benefit, they allowed me to do that lineup. We did a lineup by the book, and I picked him out. It definitely stirred up memories. Interestingly enough, it brought back additional memories of that day and things that I had struggled to actually put into place. So absolutely, yeah, it was 19 years later, there was a lot of goosebumps and quite honestly, it was one of the many emotional times that I've experienced in this case. And I'm sorry, tell me your second question.
Just over the years, did you ever lose hope that you ever get this?
That's a difficult question to answer. I held on to hope, but you can't hold on too tightly for that long. As I've come to appreciate, you just leave that alone in some ways, because you can't put too much interest in that hope. It'll just tear you apart. One of the things there's a lot of things that have been beneficial about this case. I'd be fantastic if I had not had to experience this, but I've used it to my benefit. And one of those ways is that police work is not easy. There's a lot of TV shows that would make it appear that it is. But what I had to go on that day was that it was a red Jeep with a fictitious fire tag. That is all we had. And it is difficult to go forward on that. So there's been many times in my career that I have been able to communicate with other victims who've been in that same place of frustration and tell them, I understand. So that's been a gift. But did I lose hope? I don't know if I know the answer to it. I think I always held on to hope. I don't know that there was anything that I ever really wanted more than just that the investigation be given its due. And Detective Whitlock, he did that for me. So in that regard, I had received what I ever wanted. I never really thought today would be possible. And that's just an additional gift that he gave me. So thank you.
Captain, am I correct to assume that with that boot that we're seeing there with the pencil sticking out of it, that hole is where the one and only shot that hit you, that is where it hit you?
That's correct, yes. I had a short pursuit with him, and he had pulled off into a field. I was on a motorcycle, the field was muddy. I was not going to pursue him into the field. There was no way for him to exit that field, so I stopped my motorcycle on the roadway, the intent being to see what he did. He executed a U-turn in the field. My belief was that he was going to double back and go back past me. Interestingly enough, and one of the amazing parts of this story is just the previous weekend, I had participated with one of my partners and another motorcycle officer. It was with the Arlington Police Department. We were putting together a training regiment designed to prepare officers to encounter a lethal encounter. And part of that training involved utilizing our motorcycles for areas of cover, learning to just drop our motorcycles when we've been so trained to put them on a kickstand. And so when Mark turned around and came at me, my initial thought was I'm going to dismount my motorcycle and I'm going to use it for cover as he goes back past me. At that time I didn't know why he was running, but I was not going to take any chances. What happened instead was that Mark accelerated, he spun out in the mud, and he came straight towards me. So I went from this wonderful plan that seemed really good at the time to thinking that I needed to get out of the way before he struck me with the Jeep. My belief that he was going to try to run me over. So I moved towards the side of the roadway, basically took 2 or 3 running steps for that side of the roadway, and dove for what seemed like the best cover possible, which was a small depression in the road. My back was turned. I had no ability to re-strategize at that point. And as you can see from the trajectory of the bullet, which hit me on the right outside part and traveled up my leg, he managed to hit me, I think, mid-dive. So a little bit of matrix action going on there. So.
And it looks like you've made a complete recovery from that.
I have, yeah. Very, very thankfully so.
Detective Whitlock, could you clarify, had the DNA profile just not been submitted to obtain a profile in the past, or was it advances in technology that enabled you to get a full profile in 19?
Right, so the profiles have been submitted to CODIS from the 3 bank robberies, and they link to each other, but just to an unknown person, because Mark Long's DNA was not in CODIS. And so with advancements of technology, we're able to get a different type of DNA profile, or the SNP
more complete profile?
Well, not necessarily more complete, just different. Like you have, like your, I don't want to try to get too technical, probably because I will mix up my own words, but basically, DNA that goes into CODIS is different than DNA that goes into like a genealogical database. And so it was just that genealogical type DNA did not exist back in the day. And so through advancement in technology, they were able to extract from the glove additional DNA to obtain that genealogical profile, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Detective, did Mark ever live in the area, or did he just come down here to commit crimes and go back north?
So that is one of the things that we can say. He never lived in the area. He lived in Oklahoma his whole life. He confirmed that in the interview as well, and through all the documentation we recovered. We really don't know what his mindset was for how he chose the banks he chose. There's theories out there. We're still going to do some follow-up, of course. He was a ham radio operator. There's ham radio conventions down here in Texas. In fact, really close to where the bank one was in Watauga. So we're trying to find records of that to see if he shows up there. I know he talked to one of his friends and indicated that they would come to the Galleria here in Dallas to go shopping. So, but as far as why he picked these banks or came to Texas for that specifically, I don't know.
For Captain Garner, 19 years later, are you able to forgive?
I forgave a long time ago. And again, it just there's no value in holding on to that. And one of the things that people would always ask me, do you want to see him punished? It's the job, it's not personal. I was playing my role that day, and unfortunately, he was playing his role. So, through the grace of God, I never took it personal. So that wasn't really an issue for me. Thank you.
Are there any other questions anyone has?
You may or may not be able to answer this. How much money did Mark clear in his robberies in the 7 banks? I don't know.
Yes, sir. I did not address that. I used to have the number memorized. Let's see here.
But it was 7 banks, correct?
7 banks, yes, sir. So he got 15,000 roughly in the first bank, 22,000 first bank robbery, 22,000 in the second, 215,000 in the third, 1,400 in the fourth, 33,000 in the fifth, 1,600 in the sixth, and then 8,500 in the Watauga.
Also, one other thing you mentioned, one of the pieces of evidence, or at least pictures, there was an earpiece. I know that years ago there was suggestions somebody was on the lookout.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else that
So-
your investigation, anyone else involved?
Right. We are confident at this point that he acted alone, and it was just simply him trying to intimidate the tellers, thinking there's other people involved. You better do what I'm asking you to do. But we do think that the earpiece was actually scanning for police frequencies and not actually communicating with another person.
Was Watauga his last one?
It was the last one that we know of.
Maybe.
Yeah, it could have been more in the last 19 years. Could have been other types of crimes. We unfortunately, won't ever be able to get that conclusion probably.
And what made you want to take this case and continue to follow you even almost 2 years later?
So, I've always had a hard time accepting that crimes of a violent nature can occur, whether it be a homicide or sexual assault or kidnapping or aggravated assault, etc. That those can occur, and that the person that committed those acts just disappears into thin air with no identification, no consequences. And actually, it just bothered me on a personal level. I'm sure there's some other deep in my psyche reason, but that's the thing that comes to the surface for me right now.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to come out here. I know this is maybe a little longer than most, but I think it was very important that we get this information out, and I appreciate the fact that you took the time to be here. As Captain Garner talked about, the media has been great friends to us throughout this whole journey, throughout all of our work, and we appreciate everything that's there. We will certainly be glad to stick around if anybody has any additional photos or anything to take. But for that, thank you very much for doing your thing and being here, and I hope you have a great weekend. And again, thank you to all the partners for being over today and all the work that's done. You all have a good day. Thank you.